The insult landed like a slap in the middle of a sunlit dining room, sharp enough to make the young woman's breath stutter as she stood frozen with a tray trembling in her hands, the soundless cruelty hanging in the air while laughter from another table rolled on, unaware that something inside her had just cracked open. In that single second, beneath the polished wood, crystal glasses, and filtered daylight, a lifetime of quiet endurance was being tested. Before the moment hardens further, this is where the story asks something gentle of you. If you are watching pure kindness and you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances even when the world feels cruel, take a heartbeat to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this live because people like you believe they matter. The restaurant was called Alabaster Room, a refined space carved into the corner of a historic hotel where midday light poured through tall windows and softened everything it touched. Linen-draped tables glowed in pale gold hues, and the air carried the delicate scent of citrus polish and freshly baked bread. It was a place built for people who had nothing left to prove, or so it pretended. Amal Rahimi moved through it with quiet precision, her white shirt pressed perfectly, her deep red apron tied tight like armor. She had learned how to make herself small here, how to disappear between tables while carrying too much on her shoulders. Each step was careful, every breath measured, because mistakes were expensive in places like this, and forgiveness was rare. Amal's life had been stitched together by displacement and resilience. Born in Tangier, she had grown up between languages, cultures, and expectations, absorbing words the way other children collected shells. Arabic had been the lullaby of her childhood, French the language of school, English the bridge that carried her across oceans when her family fled political unrest and landed in a city that promised safety but offered indifference. Her father had once been a respected translator before illness took him piece by piece, and her mother now folded laundry in a basement apartment, hands permanently raw from detergent and cold water. Amal worked days so her younger brother could study, so her mother could sleep without worrying about rent, so the past could stay buried where it belonged. At table 12 sat Nabil Crown, a man whose wealth had insulated him from consequence for decades. His tailored white kandura and watch that caught the sunlight were symbols of a life lived above correction. He had made his fortune young, outpacing mentors and rivals alike, and somewhere along the way, success had curdled into entitlement. To him, the restaurant was an extension of his own world, and the people who served him were scenery. When Amal approached with steady hands and lowered eyes, he barely registered her humanity. The words he let fall in Arabic were careless, dismissive, assuming invisibility, assuming superiority, assuming no one who looked like her could possibly understand. The cruelty of it did not explode, it seeped. Amal felt heat rise to her face, felt the familiar urge to swallow pain and keep moving. Her fingers tightened around the tray, and for a moment the room blurred. She thought of her father correcting her pronunciation at the kitchen table, of her mother whispering prayers over tea, of years spent translating other people's voices while losing her own. Something inside her reached a breaking point not born of anger, but of exhaustion. The day was too bright, the insult too intimate, the silence too loud. When Amal lifted her head, the shift was subtle but seismic. Her posture straightened, and the careful invisibility fell away. She responded in fluent Arabic, not loudly, not theatrically, but with clarity and grace that carried across the table like a blade wrapped in silk. She did not mimic his tone, she elevated the moment. The words flowed effortlessly, rich with cultural nuance, addressing not only the insult but the assumption behind it. Around them, the room seemed to still. Nabil's expression drained of color as realization set in, the shock visible in the way his confidence faltered and his eyes searched her face, suddenly seeing her. The silence that followed was heavier than any raised voice. Other diners glanced over, sensing a shift they could not name. Amal's heart pounded, but her voice had not wavered. In that instant, she was no longer the girl who learned to survive by staying quiet. She was the sum of every place she had been, every language she had mastered, every loss she had endured. Nabil felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, a sensation dangerously close to shame. For the first time in years, he was aware of being seen clearly, stripped of the comfortable lie that power excused everything. The afternoon light continued its slow crawl across the floor as the manager approached, tension etched into his features. Amal braced herself for the consequences she had always feared. Jobs like this were not kind to defiance, no matter how justified. Her mind raced through calculations of rent, groceries, school fees, and the look on her mother's face if she came home early with no explanation. Yet beneath the fear was an unexpected calm. She had spoken the truth in her own language, and that alone felt like reclaiming a stolen piece of herself. What happened next was not dramatic in the way stories often promise. There was no public apology shouted across the room, no sudden applause. Instead, Nabil did something far rarer. He sat back, hands trembling slightly, and listened as Amal continued, not attacking, but explaining the cost of being underestimated, the weight of being spoken over, the humanity lost when people assumed ignorance based on uniform and accent. Each sentence landed with quiet force. The billionaire who had conquered markets and boardrooms found himself disarmed by dignity. As the encounter drew to a close, Amal stepped away, legs unsteady but head high. In the staff corridor, she finally allowed herself to breathe, tears blurring her vision as the delayed fear and relief washed over her. She did not know what the outcome would be, but she knew something fundamental had changed. For Nabil, the rest of the meal passed untouched. He stared at the window, watching sunlight reflect off passing cars, confronted by the realization that his success had insulated him not just from struggle, but from empathy. The woman he had dismissed had held up a mirror he could not ignore. Days later, the ripple effects unfolded quietly. Amal was not fired. Instead, she was called into an office filled with morning light and offered an apology that felt careful but sincere. More than that, an opportunity emerged, a connection to a language consultancy seeking someone with her fluency and cultural depth. It was not framed as charity, but as recognition. Amal walked home that afternoon with the sun warming her face, the city humming around her, feeling for the first time that her voice had weight in this world. Nabil, meanwhile, began a reckoning of his own. The incident haunted him in ways no business loss ever had. He started listening differently, questioning habits long unexamined. He funded programs without attaching his name, supported initiatives that amplified unheard voices, not out of guilt alone, but out of a desire to become someone he could respect. The change was imperfect and ongoing, but it was real. As this story nears its end, take a moment and let us know in the comments what this moment meant to you. Your words help keep stories like this alive and shared. If this journey touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of dignity and the quiet courage it takes to speak, please support Pure Kindness once more by liking, sharing, and staying connected. Your support turns stories into movements. In the final frame of this story, Amal stands at a crosswalk under open daylight, city sounds swelling around her. She adjusts her bag on her shoulder, a small smile forming as she steps forward with purpose. Somewhere behind her, a man learns to listen. Somewhere ahead, a future unfolds not because of wealth or status, but because a woman refused to be invisible. And in that space between insult and understanding, hope finds its voice, reminding us that even in the brightest rooms, true illumination begins when we choose to see one another fully.